I sat in the dimly lit study, the weight of betrayal pressing against my chest like an iron fist. The hardcover book lay open on the desk before me, its pages whispering a truth I never wanted to hear. It was her book, the one she had been working on for the past year, a book she claimed was a piece of her soul, a story of love, longing, and destiny. But not my love. Not our love. His. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages, the words slicing through my pride like 1,000 daggers. Every chapter, every heartfelt confession, every poetic line, all for him, the man she once loved, the man she apparently never forgot. He was my beginning and my end. No one will ever take his place in my heart. If I had one wish, I'd turn back time and choose him all over again. The air in the room thickened, my vision blurred with something between rage and agony. I had given her everything, my love, my devotion, my name, and in return, she turned me into a placeholder, a convenience, a second choice she barely tolerated. The sound of the front door opening cut through the silence. She was home. I exhaled, closing the book with eerie calmness. She walked in, her eyes lighting up when she saw the book in my hands. "You're reading it?" she asked, hope lacing her voice. "I was so nervous about showing it to you." I smiled, not the smile of a loving husband, the smile of a man who had just made a decision. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice controlled, measured. "Every word, every page, it's clear where your heart truly belongs." Her face paled. The excitement flickered, giving way to unease. What do you mean?" I stood up, smoothing the creases in my sleeves, my movements deliberate. The divorce papers sat neatly beside the book. Signed, stamped, finalized. I pushed them toward her with quiet grace. "You wrote a book for your first love," I said, watching as confusion turned to horror in her eyes. "So I rewrote our ending." She wasn't always like this. Or maybe she was, and I had just been too blind to see it. I met Bertha 5 years ago in a coffee shop on a quiet autumn afternoon. She sat by the window, her fingers wrapped around a cup of cappuccino, lost in a book. The way she frowned in concentration, the way she bit her lower lip when she was engrossed, it was captivating. I had never believed in love at first sight, but that day, something in me shifted. I walked over, made some ridiculous comment about the book she was reading, and somehow she laughed. That was all it took. We fell fast. We fell hard, or at least I did. Bertha was everything I wanted. Smart, passionate, breathtakingly beautiful. She had a wild spirit, one that refused to be caged. And I thought, if I loved her enough, she'd never need to fly away. She told me about her past, about Ethan, the man she once loved. "It wasn't meant to be," she said, brushing it off like a forgotten dream. "I've moved on, Walter." I believed her. When I proposed to her 2 years later, she hesitated for a moment, just a second. I should have seen it. I should have known. But when she finally said yes, I let myself believe it meant something. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I loved her more than I should have. I noticed the signs over time, the way her eyes drifted off during our conversations, the way she smiled when she spoke of her past, but never with me. I told myself it was just nostalgia, just the weight of old memories. Then she started writing. "It's just a passion project," she had said, her eyes shining with excitement. Something personal. She worked on it day and night, sometimes forgetting to eat, to sleep. I supported her, encouraged her, proud that she had found something she loved so deeply. I didn't know I was funding her love letter to another man. That book was never just a passion project. It was a confession, one she never dared say out loud. A story written for a man who had long since left her life, but never her heart. And I was just the fool who believed I was enough. The night I found her manuscript, I read every single page, every stolen memory, every regret she wished she could rewrite. Not once did my name appear. I sat in our bedroom, the weight of the book in my lap, my chest hollow. The woman I built a life with had never truly been mine. And now I had to decide, would I beg for the scraps of her love, or would I walk away with my dignity intact? I already knew the answer. The book sat on my desk, its pages filled with the kind of love I had never received. Bertha had spent a year crafting it, pouring out her soul, writing every intimate detail of her emotions, her regrets, her dreams. But not for me. Never for me. I should have been furious. I should have ripped the book apart, confronted her the moment she walked through that door. But something inside me refused to let anger take over. Anger would mean I still cared. Instead, I let the cold realization sink in. I was nothing more than a shadow in her life. That night, she came into our room, humming softly as she removed her earrings, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Long day?" she asked, stretching her arms. I watched her for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. Did she even know what she had done? "You really put your heart into that book," I said, my voice steady, unreadable. She turned, a slow smile spreading across her lips. "You read it?" I nodded, waiting for the guilt to flicker across her face, waiting for her to realize what she had done, but she only looked proud, excited. "What do you think?" she asked. "It's my best work. Yet, isn't it?" I let out a soft chuckle, shaking my head. "It is." Her expression brightened, and for a split second, I saw the woman I once fell in love with. The woman I thought I knew. "I knew you'd love it. It's raw, it's real, it's about him." Silence. The smile on her face wavered. She blinked, as if she hadn't heard me right. What? I exhaled slowly, standing up and walking toward the dresser where the divorce papers lay neatly stacked. I could hear the way her breath hitched, the way her posture stiffened. "It's about him, Bertha," I repeated, my voice quieter now. "Every word, every chapter. It's about Ethan." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Guilt. There it was. Finally. "Walter, it's not like that." I turned, meeting her gaze. "Then tell me, what is it like?" She hesitated, eyes darting to the book on my desk. Her lips parted, but no excuse came. Because there wasn't one. "It's just a story," she whispered. "It doesn't mean anything. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Doesn't mean anything? Bertha, You bled for this book. You cried over it. You poured your heart into every page, and not once was it for me. She took a step forward, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. Walter, I love you. No, Bertha. My voice was calm, eerily so. You tolerate me. Her eyes widened, panic flickering in them for the first time. That's not true. I tilted my head, studying her, memorizing the way her face crumbled under the weight of her own actions. Did she even realize what she had done? Tell me, Bertha, I murmured, stepping closer, forcing her to face the truth. If he showed up tomorrow, right at our doorstep, and asked you to go with him, would you hesitate? The silence that followed was deafening. Her lips parted, her eyes desperately searching mine for something, for a lie she could hold on to, for an excuse that might make this easier. But we both knew the answer. She wouldn't hesitate, not for a second, and that was all I needed to know. I reached for the divorce papers, flipping them open to the last page. I made things easier for you, I said, handing her the pen. She stared at it, then at me, confusion and fear mixing in her expression. Walter, please, let's talk about this. I smiled, a cold, graceful smile. You already said everything you needed to, Bertha. Her hands trembled as she took the pen, staring down at the papers as if they were a foreign object, as if she hadn't already made this choice the moment. She wrote that book. You don't have to do this, she whispered. I leaned in, brushing my lips against her temple in the softest, most final gesture of goodbye. Oh, but I do. The silence between us stretched unbearably long. Bertha held the pen in her trembling fingers, hovering over the divorce papers as if signing her name would physically tear her apart. I should have felt satisfaction, relief, closure. Instead, all I felt was a strange hollowness. For years, I had built my life around this woman. I had loved her more than she deserved, more than she ever loved me. And now, watching her hesitate, watching the emotions flicker across her face, regret, pain, denial, I wondered if some part of me had always known this day would come. Walter, please. Her voice cracked, softer now. Not the confident, defiant woman I had known, but someone raw, someone shaken, someone who had been forced to see the truth of her own betrayal. I didn't answer. I just stood there, watching her break. It wasn't supposed to be this way. She was supposed to be the one walking away. She was supposed to be the one choosing someone else. And yet, here we were. She was frozen, staring at the consequences of her own choices, while I was the one leaving her behind. Walter, I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. I let out a slow breath, running a hand through my hair. Funny how people always say that after they've already destroyed you. You didn't mean to, I said, voice low, unreadable. But you did. Her lips parted, but no words came. She knew there was nothing left to argue. She could try to explain herself. She could tell me it was just a book. She could say she still loved me. But none of it would change the fact that I was never the man in her heart. Walter, I married you, didn't I? She finally said, her voice shaking. I chose you. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I let out a soft chuckle, but there was no humor in it. No, Bertha, you settled for me. Her breath hitched. She took a step closer, reaching out, but I stepped back. Walter, please, let's just talk. We can fix this. Fix what? I asked, tilting my head. Tell me, Bertha, how do we fix this? Should I pretend I never read that book? Should I pretend I didn't see you pour your soul into another man's name? Should I just sit back and be grateful that you chose to settle for me? She shook her head furiously. No, that's not what I... Then tell me what you meant. My voice rose now, my composure slipping. For the first time, anger cracked through the calm. She flinched but didn't. Look away. For once, she didn't have an answer. The truth was, she had never expected to lose me. She had expected me to be the quiet, loyal husband who would always stay, always support her, always love her, even when her heart belonged to someone else. But I wasn't that man anymore. I walked to the window, staring out at the dark streets below. A life I had built with her. A life I had believed in. All crumbling with every second that passed. Walter, I know I messed up, she whispered behind me. I swear to you, I never meant to make you feel like this. I turned, watching as she fought to hold back tears. For the first time, I saw it. She was afraid, not afraid of losing our marriage, but afraid of losing the man who had always been there for her, the man who had given her everything without question, and now he was gone. I wish you had just told me the truth before I had to read it for myself, I murmured. Walter, do you love me? The question fell between us like a heavy weight. Her lips parted slightly. I saw the answer in her eyes before she could speak it. She wanted to love me. She wanted to believe that she had moved on. But love, real love, was never a choice. I stepped forward, reaching for the pen still clutched in her fingers. Sign it, Bertha. Her hand shook violently. Walter, we can still try. Sign it, I repeated, voice softer this time, but firm, unshakable. She swallowed hard, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel satisfaction. Only felt free. Finally. I turned away, walking toward the door as she pressed the pen against the paper, her sobs the only sound in the silent room. When I reached the doorway, I paused, glancing back at her one last time. You wrote a book for your first love, Bertha, I said quietly. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, regret carved into every inch of her expression. I hope it was worth losing your last. And with that, I walked away. I thought walking away would be the hardest part. I thought the moment I placed those divorce papers in front of Bertha, the moment I told her to sign them, would be the most painful thing I'd ever do, but I was wrong, because the hardest part came after. 2 days later, I received a message from my lawyer. Your wife hasn't signed the papers yet. A slow, bitter smile stretched across my face as I read the text. Of course, she hadn't. Bertha had always been this way, always lingering in the in-between, never truly choosing. She didn't want to be with me, but she didn't want to let me go either. I should have been angry, should have stormed into our home, no, her home now, and demanded she finish what we started. Instead, I took my time. By the time I arrived at our old apartment, it was late. The lights were still on. She was still awake. I knocked once, then walked in. She was sitting on the couch, clutching a pen, the divorce papers still untouched beside her. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red-rimmed as if she hadn't slept since the night I left. When she looked up at me, something inside me tightened, but I ignored it. "You didn't sign them." My voice was cold, detached. She swallowed hard, looking down at the papers as if they physically pained her. "Walter, just give me some time." I let out a humorless chuckle. Time. After everything, she still thought. She had time. "Bertha, it's over. Just sign them." She gripped the pen tighter. "I can't." I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. "Why?" She hesitated, and then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "Because I don't want to lose you." For the first time, something in me cracked. I studied her face, the rawness in her eyes, the way her fingers trembled against the paper. She looked lost, like she had finally realized what she had done, but it was too late. "You lost me the moment you chose him," I said. Her eyes widened, panic flickering in them. "I didn't choose him, Walter. I never—" "You wrote an entire book for him, Bertha," I cut her off. "You wrote about how he was your beginning and your end. You wrote about how no one would ever take his place. So tell me, what does that make me?" She flinched. Because she knew exactly what I had been in her life. A placeholder, a safe choice. Her lips trembled. "Walter, I never meant—" "Stop saying that," I interrupted, my voice sharper now. "Stop telling me you never meant to hurt me. You did, and you knew exactly what you were doing." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I swear to you, Walter, I don't love him anymore. I was holding on to something that was already gone." I let out a slow breath, my chest tightening. Maybe that was true, but it didn't matter anymore. "Then why did it take losing me for you to realize it?" She sobbed, shaking her head. "Because I was stupid, because I didn't see what was right in front of me." I stared at her, my heart pounding. There was a time when I would have done anything to hear those words, a time when I would have fought for her, but that time was gone. I stepped forward, took the pen from her fingers, and gently pressed it into her palm. "You wrote a book for him, Bertha," I whispered, "but I won't spend the rest of my life being a footnote in someone else's story." She let out a choked sob, her shoulders shaking. "Please, don't do this." I didn't answer. I simply stepped back, and this time I didn't look back. The next morning, I received a text from Bertha. "Meet me at the coffee shop where we first met. Please, Walter, just one last time." I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over my phone. Every instinct in me screamed to ignore it. She had already wasted enough of my time, my love, my life, and yet something inside me needed to see her one last time. Maybe it was curiosity, to see what she could possibly say to change anything. Maybe it was closure, the final nail in the coffin of everything we once had. Or maybe it was just a lingering ghost of the man I used to be, the one who would have done anything for her. But that man was dead, and today I was here to bury him. The coffee shop hadn't changed. The same warm scent of espresso lingered in the air. The same corner booth where we had sat 5 years ago still had the scratch on the wooden table from where she had carved our initials. Pulse BI ran my fingers over it, but I felt nothing. When she walked in, she looked different. Her hair was unkempt, dark circles shadowed her eyes. She wasn't wearing makeup, and her clothes looked like she had thrown on whatever was closest. This wasn't the Bertha I knew. The woman who always carried herself with poise, who never let herself be anything less than perfect. She sat down in front of me, exhaling shakily. "You came," she whispered. I leaned back in my seat, my expression unreadable. "Say what you need to say, Bertha." She swallowed hard, gripping her hands together. I signed the papers. I waited for the weight of those words to hit me, but there was nothing. No sadness, no regret, just relief. "Good," I said simply. Her lips trembled. "But I need you to know, I didn't sign them because I wanted to." I arched an eyebrow. "Then why did you?" She sucked in a breath. "Because I knew I already lost you." For the first time, I saw something raw in her eyes, something that looked a lot like guilt. "I was wrong, Walter," she whispered. I was holding onto a love that didn't even exist anymore. I let myself believe I needed to honor my past, but in doing that, I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. I studied her, waiting for the part where this was supposed to change anything. "I hurt you," she continued, her voice breaking. "And I don't deserve to ask for anything from you, but if there's even the smallest part of you that still—" I held up a hand, stopping her before she could finish. "No, Bertha," I said, my voice calm but firm. "There isn't." She froze. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze steady. "Do you know what the worst part of all this was?" She swallowed hard, shaking her head. "It wasn't finding out that you still loved someone else." Her eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't realizing that I was never truly your choice." She let out a shaky breath, her fingers digging into her lap. "It was the fact that you didn't even realize you were breaking me." A single tear slipped down her cheek, but I felt no sympathy. "You didn't cheat on me with your body, Bertha, but you cheated on me with your heart. And somehow, that's worse." She let out a choked sob. "I didn't know how to let go," she whispered. "And now you'll have to," I said simply. She nodded, slowly, wiping at her face, trying to hold herself together. "You're right." I exhaled softly. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Bertha." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something. But she didn't. She just nodded, accepting the truth she should have seen all along. I stood up, grabbing my coat. "Goodbye, Bertha." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I didn't look back, and this time, I knew I never would. As I stepped out of the coffee shop, the cold air hit my face, sharp and refreshing. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. There was no bitterness in my chest, no lingering doubts, no ache for something I had already lost long ago. Just freedom. I had spent so much of my life loving a woman who could never love me the same way. And now I finally understood. It wasn't my failure. It was hers. Bertha had spent years clinging to a ghost, a memory that had no intention of coming back for her, and in doing so, she had let the one real thing she had slip through her fingers. I walked toward my car, hands tucked into my coat pockets. It should have felt like an ending, but it didn't. It felt like a beginning. The divorce was finalized. I moved out of our old apartment and into a new condo across town, a place that belonged only to me. It was strange at first, waking up in a bed that had no trace of her, no faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, no quiet footsteps in the hallway, but instead of missing it, I felt relief. Every morning, I woke up lighter. Every evening, I came home to a space that was truly mine. Then one day, the phone call came. I recognized the number immediately. Bertha hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Walter." Her voice was quiet, hesitant. "What is it, Bertha?" A long pause. Then, "Can we meet?" I frowned. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce was finalized. "Why?" I just want to see you." There was something in her voice that I couldn't quite place. Regret, uncertainty, maybe even desperation. For a brief moment I considered saying no. But then I realized I wasn't afraid of seeing her anymore. "All right," I said. "One last time." She chose the same coffee shop. It was a cruel irony. The place where it all started was the place she wanted to see me one last time. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting in the same booth where we had first met. But she looked different this time. Not the confident, radiant Bertha I had fallen for, but someone who looked like she had lost something she didn't know she needed. Her fingers curled around her coffee cup as she looked up at me. "Thank you for coming," she murmured. I sat down, waiting. She exhaled shakily. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. About us. About what I did." I didn't respond. I just let her speak. "I never realized how much I took you for granted," she whispered. "Not until you were gone." I leaned back, studying her carefully. I had expected regret, but not this much. "And now that I've lost you," she continued, her voice thick with emotion, "I see it. I see what I threw away, what I destroyed." I let out a quiet breath. "Why are you telling me this, Bertha?" She swallowed hard. "Because I miss you." For a brief moment, I felt something stir inside me, a flicker of something old, something once familiar, but then it was gone. "No, Bertha," I said softly. "You don't miss me. You miss the man who used to love you unconditionally, the one who would have done anything for you." Tears filled her eyes. "Walter, that man is gone." A single tear slipped down her cheek. "I know." Silence stretched between us. For years, I had been the one waiting for her to see me, waiting for her to finally choose me. And now, when she finally did, I no longer wanted her. That was the difference between us. She had only realized my worth after I left. I had realized my own worth before I let her take any more of me. "I hope you find happiness, Bertha," I murmured, standing up. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table, her shoulders shaking. "Walter, please, is there any part of you that could ever love me again?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "No." And with that, I turned and walked away, this time for good, and I never looked back. As I stepped into the cool evening air, a sense of peace settled over me. I had thought closure would come from anger, from making her suffer the way she made me suffer, but it didn't. It came from realizing that I didn't need her anymore. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to my lawyer. Block her number. I don't want to hear from her again. Then, as I tucked my phone away, a new thought hit me. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of something better.